Good morning. It is a new day. My name is Priscilla, and I am here this morning with Dr. Ron Pierce. Dr. Pierce is our guest for the new day today. It's good to be here. It really is lovely to be here. Give me a minute as I introduce uh, Dr. Pierce to us. Sorry, my okay. So Dr. Pierce is a professor of Testament, Biola University, Talbot School of Theology. He has been an advocate for biblical gender equality since 1992. Dr. Pierce believes that men and women should share mutuality in servant-oriented leadership in a home, in a church, in a society without gender-based restrictions. I am so besides myself to have him here. I know that we stand to gain a lot of knowledge from this well-learned man. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Pierce is here this morning to share his knowledge with us. Please stay with us. Please stay with us as this promises to be an informative and educated conversation. Welcome, Dr. Pierce.
Thank you very much. Good to be here, Priscilla.
I am so sorry. And besides myself, I know I cannot introduce you properly. I'm just thinking of dating. So if you just want to go ahead and just add on something that I left about you that you want to share, especially the part with how long you've been married to your partner.
Mm-hmm. Yes, my wife Pat and I have been married 53 years this next week. So we're coming up on our 53rd anniversary. And I've been teaching at Biola for 46 years. So wonderful opportunity in ministry and life that God's given us.
Thank you. And I heard during one of your lectures, you said, I think before the 50s or thereabout, but there was a point in the history of Biola University where the faculty were all complementarians, and it seems like you were the lone voice. You were the only egalitarian. How did it feel? Like, you want to give us a little background about that time, that period in time?
Sure. Yeah, I actually began teaching as a complementarian. And it was about 10 years into my teaching that I changed my mind after a study of scripture. So I was the only faculty member who was egalitarian in the School of Theology. And it felt lonely a little bit threatening. I wasn't quite sure if I could keep my job or not. But graciously, the university allowed me to do that. And so I've been advocating for gender equality for more than 30 years now.
Okay. All right. You know what? Let's go to the foundation. First of all, tell us what is complementarian. What do you mean by complementarian and egalitarian?
Sure. Egalitarianism it doesn't mean that men and women are equal in every way. In other words, that there's no differences. But rather, it's like racial equality. It doesn't mean a person can't bring their own cultural background or their own ethnic background, but they have equal opportunities in society, in the home. And so that's what biblical equality or egalitarianism means, that women would have an equal opportunity to serve Christ in the church, to share together in leadership of the home. Complementarianism actually is a softened version of old patriarchy, where old patriarchy believed that women were inferior. Therefore, women could not share equally in the home or in the church or in the society. But in the 1950s and really in the 1960s, there arose a movement that believed that women were equal in being, but not equal in function. And that was labeled complementarianism. Sadly, the term complementarian or complementarianism is not yet in standard English dictionaries, but it is used within, especially within the evangelical movement, to refer to this hybrid view, equal in status, but not in function.
Yeah, that is something else that I kind of struggle with a little because I don't understand how we can be equal in being and not equal in function or status.
Mm-hmm.
Because I'm thinking if we're equal in being, then based on what are we not equal in function or status? And this is because a few years ago, that was 2018 to be exact. And then I was at this program. I was one of the panelists, and this
Mm-hmm.
question was asked, and then someone said, "Oh, pastor actually said, oh yes, no, we equal in yeah, we equal because women are human beings, but God said we're not equal in in headship. They can have leadership, but we can allow them to work outside." This was in response to a question that someone had
Mm-hmm.
asked about how can Priscilla be talking about gender equality in the media, because I'm a journalist, and then that was her presentation. How can you be talking about equality in the media, but you're Christian and you're not supposed
Mm-hmm.
to, and you're a woman? And then that was the response by this Reverend. And then I was thinking, I don't understand that. How can we be equal in being and then different in function and status? So do you want to share light on that?
Sure. Yeah, I think that is completely illogical to say that women are equal in being, but they can't be equal in function because of their being. Rebecca Groteis, who was my co-editor in the first edition of Discovering Biblical Equality, made an excellent point on that. I'm sorry, my screen just went in the wrong direction here. That's okay. I can't see you.
Oh, really?
Oh, I'm sorry. No, it's not your fault. It's my fault. Here, I'm going to do that. Now I can see better. There we go. My apologies. Now, Rebecca Groteis wrote an article, I think maybe the strongest article in our first book, speaking directly to that it doesn't make sense. Old patriarchy, as sad as it was, makes sense. If a person's inferior, then they can't function equally. But to say you're equal in being, but you can't function equally, doesn't make sense. I think it's illogical. It just doesn't hold up to
I
the
think so
test.
too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So why are we so let's start with God. Let's start with God.
Mm-hmm.
Um, did God create man in his image or humanity in his image? Like when God started creating in the beginning,
Mm-hmm.
did God name man as a kind from the rest of other creatures, or God named them as humanity from the beginning?
Yeah, I think that's a misunderstanding that has come through our translations. I work in an English speaking world, so English translations. The Hebrew word Adam, from which we get the proper name Adam, can mean three different things. It can be a proper name, it can simply mean humanity, and it can mean a man. It can mean all three of those things. So the question is, what does it mean in a specific context? And in Genesis 1:27, when it says God created Adam in his image, male and female, he created
Okay.
Adam. There's a singular pronoun there. Uh, it has to be humanity. It can't be man in a masculine sense, because this Adam is male and female. So I think it has to be humanity. Mankind has become a translation that's popular. I think the New International Version uses that. But I think it is still misleading. I think humanity is better.
Yeah, I think so too. Now I push back on the term guys. I usually now tell people when they keep saying, "Oh, you guys," I have to say at work, "Hey, I'm a lady,"
Mm-hmm.
because I think terms can be, language can. Last week I did a presentation where I talked about how language can convey ideas, and ideas, influence our actions.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I think the terms can be misleading. I agree with you. So during one of your lectures, when you were talking about Adam, uh, um, I think this was why you were explaining the relevance of sequence. Does sequence matter, or because Adam came first, so does that mean he's the leader? Yet, the Bible tells us God made them from Adam, which is feminine in, I think it has a feminine gender, the grammar or something. I want you to elaborate on that because it sounds like the chicken and the egg situation. Who
Mm-hmm.
came first, and the woman came from man, but the man came from woman. Yeah, I want you to go into
Sure.
that.
Yeah, God creates the earth. So, and the earth or ground is Adamah. It's just the ah ending is feminine in Hebrew. So Adamah. And then in Genesis 2, from the Adamah, he creates Adam. So he creates humanity out of the ground. But he creates the man first. And then from the man, he takes this flesh, this rib, and creates a woman. And so in chapter 2, there is a sequence, no doubt. Paul talks about a sequence. Adam came first, Eve came second. But the question is, what does the sequence mean? Not whether it's there. And I think what's interesting to lay as a groundwork is that there isn't just the sequence of creation, but there is then the sequence of procreation. So just as the man came first, and Paul talks about this in the New Testament, so from that point on, the woman comes first. So all men in the world come from women, except for Adam. And then Paul says, and we all come from God. So in other words, I think Paul is saying, no, the sequence isn't that important. But if you want to argue for sequence in Genesis, I think you have to recognize that while the man came first once, women have come first ever since.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and complementarians usually push that sequence that the man came first. I was at another or part of another conference where that was what the speaker was using a few years ago. The man came first, so he's the head, and I'm thinking, and so it makes him the leader. So I'm not thinking. So because I wrote my question, I was like,
Mhm.
it wasn't even a question, it was a point I was making. I said, if we have to go back, we have to make that argument that when someone is the first and they automatically becomes the leader, God is communicating that or first means leader. Then why did God make Joseph leader of the sons of Jacob?
Mhm.
Or David chosen among
Mhm.
his bigger brothers,
Mhm.
and Manasseh, I think Manasseh preferred
Mhm.
first before Ephraim or one of them. I mean,
Right, right.
God creates cross according to their grandfather Jacob, and this is played out in a couple of scenarios where someone was in the first but became the leader in the family.
Mhm.
So,
Mhm.
if we
Yeah,
want to make that argument, why?
there are many cases where God chooses someone who's not the first. And
First
what's
child.
really interesting, I just saw a note from a friend of mine, Mike Davis, who said if we take that rule, then Jewish people, the Israelites, should be leaders in our church because
Right.
God chose Israel first, and the rest of us, I'm not a Jew, the rest of us second.
Mhm.
But no, that that sense of priority of Israel was turned upside down in the New Testament to say it doesn't matter who comes first.
I
Um,
know.
and it's in the same passage, of course, where God says the same thing, where Paul says the same thing about slaves and about women.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. So, okay, so God went ahead. So even though based on the sequence, you you and I think other, I mean most egalitarians believe that
Mm-hmm.
that doesn't mean that God creating hierarchy there. But then somewhere later, it still seems like God created hierarchy, or did he not? So tell us, where did God create hierarchy? Where specifically, when complementarian are telling
Mm-hmm.
us that the man is the head, yes, God created this from the beginning. Where exactly is that?
Sure. There's two passages I think that we have to look at in Genesis, in chapter 2 and chapter 3. So in chapter 2, the man is alone and he can't fulfill the creation mandate. And so God creates the woman, he makes her from the man so that he is able to do that. So she is a ezer kenegdo, she is a helper corresponding to him. And many complementarians will say, okay, a helper is like an assistant, and therefore the man is the leader, and she's just there to help him. But in Hebrew, no, God is the ezer, but God is not an ezer corresponding to us. God is an ezer superior to us. But the woman is not created superior to the man or inferior to the man. She's created like him, corresponding to him. So Adam looks at all the animals, none of them are like him. Now Eve is created, she is like him, she's corresponding. A friend of mine suggested recently that the better translation of ezer kenegdo would be a strong ally, because God, as the helper, comes aside Israel as a strong ally and rescues them. So I don't see it in chapter 2 or in the creation story. Where it comes is in chapter 3, where we have the judgment for sin. And sometimes we call that a curse, but actually there's not a curse on the woman. Creation, the ground is cursed. The
I was
serpent is,
going.
yeah, the serpent is
Okay.
cursed, but not the male and female. They are judged, but the judgment on the woman is that she will desire her husband and he will rule over her. There's
Good.
hierarchy, there's patriarchy. Yes.
Good, good. I was going to get to that. I was going to get to that. So I just want to make sure I do not miss something here. You mentioned the animal. Adam looked at the rest of creation and didn't see anyone looking like him. Then I remember in one of your lectures you had mentioned, if we want to go by sequence and who was created first, and so they become leader. God created everything else first, like created the animals, created the trees. So are they
Mhm.
our leaders? So yeah, I wanted to add that part there. But yeah, to the part about curse, God cursed the woman. Um, there are some people who still believe that women are still cursed. I have friends sometimes will post we're working together to support domestic violence survivors and
Mhm. Mhm.
victims. And then you see things like, hmm, God, this curse that God has, you're just talking among yourself. Why do the abusive men do this? Well, the curse that God placed on women, it really is giving us problem. I'm thinking, will you stop saying this and posting this?
Mhm. Mhm.
So if God placed so much curse that Jesus Christ death and resurrection that saved could not remove that curse,
Mhm.
then God really must hate women
Yes,
because
yes. Oh,
yeah,
that's it's just horrible to hear that even. Yes, it breaks my heart. because Christ came to redeem us from the curse, and not to judge, but to redeem. And so it would be like saying, okay, women are cursed, therefore women should suffer in childbearing. There was a time when women were withheld pain relief in childbearing because there was this feeling that God wanted them to suffer. And yet
Yeah.
those same men are happy to have God help them with the crops in the field. And maybe
Yes.
they have some weed killer or some fertilizer. Well, why do any of that if you just are supposed to let the seed fall on its own and crops grow by themselves? So no, I think the New Testament is so clear that Christ came to redeem male and female and to restore, well, even better than to restore what was there in creation, because he brings us to a new creation. In the new creation, which is what Paul talks about in Corinthians and in Galatians, in the new creation, there's neither male nor female. In other
No.
words, there is this wonderful equality that we can
Mhm.
share together. And I think complementarianism, the word is unfortunate because it suggests that we don't complement each other if we're egalitarian. Uh, the term for complement and complementarian was actually used first by egalitarians to say, because women bring something different, let's say to the leadership of the church, we need women in the leadership of the church because they complement. Yeah, not in spite of them being complementary.
Yeah. 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 I agree. I mean, I agree with the point you pointed out about God being our helper.
Mhm.
Um, if God is our helper and then God is perceived as superior when God is our helper, because Ezek, which is spelled Ezer,
Mhm. Mhm.
Ezel, which means helper, uh, we ask God, help me. You are my helper in this situation. And we see that as a superior intervening in our situations, right? And an indispensable help and a supreme helper.
Yes.
Yet when Isaac is applied to woman or to Eve, it is interpreted as subordinate for some reason. And like you said, the Kenendo, one of my professor mentors used to explain it like this. 2019, I was doing some we are equal in the spirit courses with them, and her
Mm.
explanation is that Kenendo means um, stand opposite, like someone
Mhm.
who is going to hold you in check, or
Mhm.
help, that is going
Mhm.
to not necessarily fight you, but brings in another perspective.
Mhm. Mhm.
So check and balance. So this is an equal partner who goes with you, but make sure that you're keeping each other in check.
Right.
And I thought that was
Absolutely.
an interesting way to describe it.
Yeah, I think we have to see in Genesis 2 that Adam is needy before Eve is created. So it is, the text says it is not good for the man to be alone.
Yeah.
Once the woman comes alongside him, side by side, standing across from, then it's good. Now it's good again because they are together. They are partners. And I think partners is a good term to use in English. Partners, they are together. They bring different things to the relationship, and together they are better than they are alone. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. Dr. Pierce, can you elaborate a little more on the use of the plural pronouns and the singular pronouns in the creation account?
Sure. Yeah. And especially in Genesis 1:27. So God created Adam in his image, that's singular. And then in the image of God, he created, and that's the question. How do we translate that last pronoun? It's because in English, you have he, she, or it. So it's masculine singular because it refers to Adam instead of Adama, which is the feminine. Um, and yet, in some translations, translate that God created him in the image of God, and therefore they believe that only men are in the image of God. But the singular there is for Adam. So I think it's better to say the New International Version translates it with a plural. God created in the image of God, God created Adam in his image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. That might be the best way to do it in English, but
Yeah.
it's unfortunate because Hebrew doesn't have the it, the neuter. And
Yeah.
so it's different because of the language change. Or you could just say God created Adam in his image. In the image of God, he created humanity. Male and female, he created
Okay.
them.
Thank-
And then it's plural. Male and female, he created them. And of course, implied in his image.
Yeah. 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 So now Eve was created to hold this guy, to help this guy,
Mm.
compliment him because he felt incomplete or sad or lonely or needy before she came along. And after that was done, even God said everything God made was good. Because
Mm.
it was after creating Eve, we see everything God made was good. How come she comes along in the picture and instead of helping him, she deceives him
Yes, yes, yes. Well, let me comment just about one thing with Adam first. I, we,
without him knowing? She
yeah,
deceived him without him knowing.
yeah. I don't think Adam was just lonely. I think he was really alone. And so it's not
Okay.
about how he felt. It's about he was just in fact in need. Even if he didn't feel needy, he was in need. It wasn't good. So yeah,
Okay.
what happens then in the chapter 3 when we have the fall? So why does she deceive him? I don't think she deceives Adam. No place does it say, and the woman deceived the man. Rather, she was deceived. That's clear. Paul says that straight out.
That's what Paul says. She
Uh,
was deceived.
and then she gives the fruit to her husband. That's all. She just hands the fruit to her husband, and he chooses to eat it. So I think that's the point. He wasn't deceived. And Paul says that as well. The man was not deceived. He chose voluntarily to sin. So which is the
Yeah.
worst? Is it bad to be tricked and then you sin? I mean, that's bad. But it's worse if you know better and you choose to sin,
Yeah.
which is what Adam does. He knows better and he chooses to sin. So his sin, if anything, is a little more egregious than hers.
And I need you to please elaborate on that because I know, but I need the audience to
Uh-huh.
get why you think Adam wasn't deceived. I know that. So yeah, I need you to explain
Sure.
why are you saying Adam wasn't deceived and he chose to do, but Eve was deceived.
Yeah, and I would say that primarily you could imply that from the Genesis text, but I think it is explicit when you come to Paul's letter to Timothy, where he just simply says straight out, the woman was deceived and the man was not deceived. So if he's not deceived and yet he does what's wrong, I think the only logical conclusion is he
He
chooses
knew.
to do what's wrong. I mean, she
Yeah.
wasn't twisting his arm. She didn't threaten his life. We don't have anything like that. She just hands him the fruit.
Yeah.
And that's all it says.
And
Yeah.
I remember I think it was again one of your lectures when you explained the background was that um God told him before she even
Hmm.
came into existence, told him you cannot do this. So if it's anything, she didn't know she was deceived, but he knew because he was told this is what you cannot do. So that's what Paul was repeating when Paul said she was deceived because she wasn't even on the scene when God told Adam, this you can have, this you
Hmm.
cannot have. So he went into it knowing, but she didn't. She was deceived by this very smart snake.
Yes, the very smart
Yeah,
snake. Yes.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I think she knows enough. So it wasn't just, in other words, she's still guilty of sin, just as Adam is. Even though she was tricked, she is able to say to the serpent, um, God said that you can eat of any fruit except that fruit, and if you eat of it, you will surely die. So she knows all of that. Evidently, Adam told her. But she also adds just a little bit to it that God said, don't even go near it. Don't even touch it. Uh, and some people will fault Eve for that, saying, oh, she got it wrong or she twisted it. And Adam, she got it from Adam. So whatever she heard, he must have told her, unless God told her something. So
Yeah.
if I were giving her a quiz, I would give her an A because she got the idea right. But
Yeah.
she was deceived in that she thought, even though God said this, it would be better if she did something different. And that's where I think the deception comes. We know very little about why Adam chose to eat it. All we know is that he wasn't deceived. It was something else. Was it pride? Was it arrogance? The Bible never tells us. We just know that it certainly was sin, because the
Yeah.
sin of Adam has to be corrected by the sin of the second Adam, the coming of the righteousness of the second Adam, the coming of Christ. Yes.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Thank you. So now let's get to when patriarchy became introduced. Explain to us the part about your desire shall be for your husband. But before you explain this, can you please define for us what do you mean by prescriptive and descriptive?
Sure. Descriptive, maybe the best illustration there would be that the let me use, if I can use an illustration from Ephesians 5. I know we'll talk about that later, but Ephesians
Yeah.
5, the woman is to submit to her husband because he is the head. That's what husbands were in those days. It describes the husband headship. It doesn't say the husband should be the head. That would be prescriptive. So husbands, love your wives. That's prescriptive. The husband is the head. That's descriptive. And if you describe something, that's just the way it is. If you prescribe something, that's the way it should be. Yeah,
Like what the doctor does.
right. What did God tell Adam to do? And he never tells him to lead his wife or to be her head or to whatever, have authority over her. Those prescriptive terms are never there. Matter of fact, Adam is not told to do anything with regard to his wife. She's there to help him, but he's not told to lead her or do anything else or even give her orders, or there is no prescription as to how Adam should relate to Eve.
Okay. Can we say though the only prescription maybe was for them to have dominion over everything else and not
Mhm.
each other?
Absolutely. That's exactly where the prescription comes. If there is a prescription for hierarchy, it is the man and the woman together over the rest of creation. And so they're told to do two things. They're told to be fruitful and multiply, and they're told to exercise dominion. And they have to have each other to do that, because they can't be fruitful and multiply and therefore exercise dominion until you have both the male and the female.
Yeah.
So yes, absolutely. They need each other in order to do what God commands them to do, and that is just to be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, and subdue it.
Okay. Okay. So I know you answer this, but for some reason, it maybe it's me. I'm thinking that it's not really clear. Like, what is meant by your desire shall be for your
Oh, yes.
husband,
Yeah.
and he shall rule over you. So, God, if God wasn't declaring, prescribing patriarchy, what was God saying there?
Yes. Yeah. What God prescribes, let me start with the desire first. What does it mean with your desire will be for him, or your desire shall be for him? There are all kinds of speculations as to what that means, what she desires. Some feel, I have a good friend and colleague, Cynthia Westfall, who feels that the woman desires to sort of be under the nurturing leadership of a man. But he's going to dominate her instead of being a kind leader. I don't think that's it. The clue that we have in the text is that your desire will be for him and he will rule over you. So if rulership over the woman is the one side, it seems to me that she desires to rule over him. And now he's going to rule over her. So what we had designed in the beginning as this wonderful partnership, a mutuality, now becomes a struggle for dominance. Or what was prescribed as them ruling over creation becomes a struggle for them to rule over each other. She's going to want to rule him. He's going to end up ruling her. We have enmity and strife, which is exactly what happens with the woman's seed and the serpent's seed. That there's going to be this struggle. He's going to try to rule him, but Christ will come and crush the head of the serpent. And now the woman will try to rule over the man, and the man's going to rule over the woman. And we have this struggle that we see right down to the present time of patriarchy and a struggle to find dominance. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Can we say traditional patriarchy was informed by, or maybe has its roots from the fact that in ancient time there were a lot of war, people survived by conquest and dominance. So because men are built in certain way, they went out to fight. Why? So that this is complementing each other, right? So women cannot fight because they are not built upper. The upper part is not built in a way to carry spears or the way they used to fight. Unlike now, you have to use your mind to shoot a gun or something. But so that was the case. So men fought, and then women did the other part, like ran the home or stuff. But now it's being interpreted as that is a self work. So that means that you as a servant and I do the hard part because I work. Since I'm built like this, that means I'm the leader.
Yeah, I think early patriarchy was a power issue
Okay.
because men had that upper body strength. Men with testosterone are more aggressive generally, and therefore they can fight or tend to fight more, which isn't always a good thing because men tend to argue and fight more and women not so much. And therefore the man ended up dominating the woman because he was able to, physically able to. And then because the woman bore the child and nursed the child, there was this connection that a woman makes with her child, her unborn child, and then her infant child. And then she became assigned to that role while men went out and fought. So it sort of, it worked for that. And that's not a bad thing, the complement part of that, the complementarity part of that. It just becomes bad when the man comes home and dominates the woman. That's where patriarchy becomes, I think, becomes sin.
Yeah.
And so I'll use the strong language for it. I think it becomes sin for the man to dominate the woman.
Yeah. Instead of dominating other creation or creatures, and then you come and dominate your partner.
Yes, to
Yeah.
dominate your partner instead of sharing with her and bringing your complementary differences to make a more fruitful relationship. You are now using your differences to dominate each other or him to dominate her because of his strength. And of course, in the modern world, it does look different because our warfare is not hand-to-hand combat for the most part. And so it does look different. And what men go out to do, working in the field, so to speak, now isn't the same thing. They're working with IBM, and they're working with computer technology. And so a woman doesn't necessarily do that worse than the man or vice versa. So I think those kind of stereotypical gender roles change all the time with the way society and culture change. But the question is not how does society and culture change? The question is, what does God desire? And I think he desires for mutual submission to one another, yielding authority to one another. Yeah.
Yep, from the very beginning, right? From the very
From the
beginning.
beginning, yes.
Wow. So, but with all of that, the church actually thought in certain period in history that women were made in the image of God, but that men were made in the image of God.
Yes. Yes. I have worked with colleagues in my own ministry since the 1970s who still believe that men bore the image of God and women could only reflect the image of God through a man. And that's in the 1970s. So that sad lie has
Purification.
been around for a long time. But thankfully, there were church fathers, and I'm trying to think, I think it was John Chrysostom, but I'm not sure, who believed that women and men shared equally the image of God. So it's not that it wasn't thought of back in the day, but patriarchy tended to blur it or blunt it. But in the modern context, even with complementarians, that view is thankfully is gone, at least in Western complementarianism. I have many complementarian colleagues now at the school where I teach, and none of them think that women bear the image of God any less than men bear the image of God. So we all bear it equally. And even in our school statement, we make that statement. So thankfully, that is going away, that old lie. But not everywhere in the world is that going away. There are many places where that is still very, very much
Yeah,
the assumed truth.
yeah, sadly,
Yeah.
sadly. Oof. Okay. If Dennis, if you are with us, we could take a break,
Mhm.
or you want to read some comments or some questions. Otherwise, I'll keep going at Dr. Pierce. So, are you there, Dennis? Do we have questions? You want to give us break?
I think Dennis is telling us for us to choose.
Okay, yeah, we'll go ahead.
Mhm.
So again, you had mentioned before during one of your lectures that women. So I think you even briefly mentioned that there was a time that women were punished
Mm.
for accepting pain reliever during labor.
Yes.
So, uh, but then you said that they were considered heretic or witches and they were burned to the stake, and the
Mhm.
babies were taken after they gave birth because they accepted pain reliever during labor. And the reason was because God had prescribed that she will have labor in childbirth. So there's no need for her to take accept pain reliever.
Yeah.
How far back was that happening?
Just 100 years ago, 120 years ago, maybe 150, maybe in the late 1800s to the early 1900s, but it was happening in the northeastern United States with some very strict Christian movements who would do this.
Hmm.
But thankfully, I don't know of any place, at least not in the Western world, that's happening. If there's other places in the world that's happening, then I will weep with those who weep. I think, with regard to that, because that is such a tragic thing. Because those same men who do that are happy to receive help in working the
Yeah.
ground, and yet they want the woman to suffer in childbearing. It is just simply not God's will that we suffer under the curse. That is exactly what Christ came to redeem us from. And I don't think we can stress that strongly enough. Uh,
Okay. Okay. Um, so so that means the thinking was that judgment as a result of sin became God's perfect will. Men will rule. Patriarchy between God's becomes God's perfect will and for humanity.
Yes, that was the thinking. And I have very few complementarian friends who still think that way. The majority of complementarians would say what happens in Genesis 3 with the man will rule her is a distortion of what God intended in creation, which they would say is a servant leadership or headship. I challenge them by asking, where can you find in Genesis 1 or 2 any statement about the man leading in any kind of a way, not even a servant way? There's no statement about a man leading until we get to chapter 3 of Genesis, and then it's that horrible judgment of patriarchy. So yes, patriarchy, I believe, starts in Genesis 3 and has been the sad reality of humankind ever since.
Okay. Yeah. All right. So we're going to take a break. Let's take a break and then we'll come back. Um,
At Focus on Liberia, we discuss everything Liberia, from education to politics, arts and culture, entertainment, agriculture, history, religion, family, and technology. Focus on Liberia uncovers and showcases the best of Liberia and shows the world the truth about Liberia. We educate, elevate, and promote all things Liberia. We conduct interviews, panel discussions, debates, and more. Tune in to Focus on Liberia on Facebook and YouTube and be a part of the stories that make up the news.
This is Focus on Liberia, and I am Dennis Jar.
all right, we're back. Now we're going to move to the New Testament. Before we do that, let me see whether we have any questions. Let me see whether we have any questions. Otherwise, if woman came from man, is that order and sequencing the same today?
Mm.
That's
That's a good,
Dennis.
yeah, that's a good question. And I think even the Apostle Paul would say, no, absolutely not, because only once did the woman come from the man, and that was Adam and Eve. And Paul says, ever since that time, women have been coming from men, not men from women. So the ordering and sequencing, I don't think it is there today at all. We
Okay.
might ask, you might ask the question, why does Paul mention it in 1 Timothy 2? But that's a separate question. Yeah.
All right. He wants to know equal function and in being. Please give examples to differentiate the two.
Yes. Let's start with function. To be equal in function is to say that a woman could be the pastor of a church and a man could be the pastor of the church. They have equal opportunity to function in the same way. Being a woman is different than the man. And they would say, my complementarian friends would say that a woman is exactly equal in her ability to preach or to teach or to shepherd. There's no inferiority. She's equal in her abilities, but just because God said she can't do it, therefore she can't do it. So she can't function to be consistent with her equality in being. So I think that's the difference.
Yet God didn't say she can't do it. Uh Akina Wesley, it's a very interesting indeed. We all come from women.
Mm-hmm.
Um and then is God creates man and gave him responsibilities. Later he created a woman. The woman is the helper. Helper in that sense means Eve was created as an assistant. How is that not complement here?
Yeah, two things there. First of all, complementarity simply means they bring differences. And in that specific case, there is clearly complementarity because without the woman, the man cannot be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it. So
No,
he needs her because they're different, complementary. But does her coming second mean she's his assistant
assistant.
and he's the leader? And
No.
there's no place in the Old Testament where the word helper means assistant. If anything, it usually means the leader or the stronger one. Or I think the best translation would be a strong ally.
Yeah.
That's what she's created to be for him, because he
Yeah.
can't do it by himself. He's inadequate. And now he's complete. He can do it. They
Yeah.
can do it together. Yes. Good question.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know why. I don't know why we don't see it like that. But well, and we said it sometimes during the this discussion that um let me read this question. Was the
Mhm.
creation of Eve second thought? He realized that man cannot be alone, or was it in his original plan? I think
Yes.
it was in his original plan, but Dr. Pierce can respond to
Sure.
that.
That is a great question. I often ask myself, if equality was what God wanted, then why didn't he just create man and woman at the same
Yeah,
time?
yeah, you said that.
And I think the answer is because if he had created them at the same time, both out of the ground, they would not be in relationship. They would be separate. What God wants between the man and the woman is
It's one head.
relationship. So
Mhm.
she comes from him. She is of his flesh and bone, he says. And then they return together to become one
And
flesh. And
imagine.
so they're taken from one flesh, returned to one flesh. And so, no, not a second thought at all. I think that is the original plan, to
Mhm.
create them so that they are, in a sense, inseparable partners. They need each other. He doesn't just need her, she needs him. So they are inseparable partners. And the beauty of that is seen in the way they are created in Genesis 2.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
good question.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. I agree. We had a program in our church where yeah, Mother's Day or Women's Day, and that was what the preacher was like. Hey, women came as a second thought. I'm like, nope. God, who knows? We are told God knows from the beginning to the end. It's
Absolutely.
not going to not think things through and later be like, oh, yeah, yeah, he needs. I think, I personally, my understanding from that point was the illustration to show that man was alone and inadequate was to show that
Mhm.
when you come together a partner so that you get the understanding that without the other, nothing could have, it wasn't complete. It
Yes.
wasn't really good. So that is to
Yeah.
demonstrate that because all of creation was made were made two.
Mhm.
Remember, God made animals and everything else, but then when it came to us, why we had to go through all of that. This is the same reason to show that you cannot be without the other. So,
Mhm.
but it wasn't like an afterthought. That was the thought from the beginning.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. Okay. And then, like Dr. Pierce said, 39 times or more, maybe the word Isaac is
Mhm.
used in scripture to show, the same Isaac that's applied to Eve as the helper is applied to God. They go into war, they needed Isaac, you
Mhm.
know. Who is that? Is God the helper?
Mhm.
So for some reason, why when it's woman, then the context is, or it's lower, she's assistant, just because of
Mhm.
sequence. Again, we already talked about sequence. If
Mhm.
sequence is what determine leadership, so the first become the leader, then we wouldn't have Joseph, then we wouldn't have David, then being king. We wouldn't have Solomon after Absalom and all the other guys for Solomon to become king for among David's sons, and on and on and on. We have a lot of different examples about that. River says, "Bro, why were women who committed sins ordered to be stoned during biblical times?"
Yeah, good question again. I would just point out that both men and women were ordered to be stoned if they committed sins. So it's not just women who were stoned, but men or women could be stoned if they committed certain sins. Um, so yeah, it was a method of capital punishment in the Old Testament that applied to both sexes, male and female.
All right, thank you. All right, so we want to move on to you don't want to listen to Ephesians You throw efficient at us all the time. Somebody, I just read a comment who threw efficient at me the other day. Let me read this. The
Mm-hmm.
Adam of 6,000 years ago represents white people. We as black people created white people. Is Yeah, no, I'm not interested in this one. Um, we're
Different
talking
subject.
about the equality of humanity. Please, let's the new day is about how we think about women and girls. So please let your comments or question be about the subject we're talking about. Okay, so I'm going to move on. We're going to move on to efficient.
Mm-hmm.
Efficient, the poster. It's not the entire Ephesians 5 even. They just single out
Mm-hmm.
Ephesians 5:22, strip off all context, strip
Yeah.
off every other preceding verses, and after the one that come afterwards, they just throw Ephesians 5. So but you said something
Mm-hmm.
I heard you say something before where you were talking about how interesting it is that First Corinthians 7 is, I think, 5 times or more longer than Ephesians 5
Mm-hmm.
22, and it addresses relationship or marriage. But
Mm-hmm.
interestingly, we do not highlight a complementarians will run to Ephesians 5:22, or most of us
Mm-hmm.
will run to Ephesians 5:22 and leave out First Corinthians 7 that talks about mutuality. So please tell us about Ephesians 5:22.
Sure. Yes. And just to put that one statement from First Corinthians 7 beside it, in First Corinthians 7, it says that in the intimacy of marriage, neither partner has authority over the other. Neither partner even has authority over their own bodies, but they yield it to the other. So it's the only place where the word authority is used regarding marriage. Then we come to Ephesians 5. And yes, chapter 5, it's a long chapter. It talks about the fruits of the Spirit, being filled with the Spirit, and 5 different ways that is evidenced. And the last one of those in verse 21 is submitting to one another. It's a participle,
Mhm.
submitting to one another out of reverence for Christ. And then in verse 22, which, yes, is often quoted by itself, in verse 22, it simply says, wives to your own husbands. It doesn't say, wives, submit to your own husbands. There's no verb in the Greek. You have to read
Yeah,
verse 21 to read verse 22. But what we have done in English translations
it's
is
rearranged.
we've separated it from verse 21. We've added the verb submit, and we've made it as if it's a standalone statement. Wives, submit to your husbands out of reverence for Christ, because your husband's the head of the wife. And so I think we can't read that, honestly, we can't read that without verse 21. It's part of mutual submission. And it's the part that applies to the wife. So why does Paul say it? Why does he have to tell wives to submit? In that culture, that was the norm for wives to submit. Husbands were the heads. They were the authority over the wives. Perhaps it's because he's writing to the church in Ephesus, where a strong goddess cult was present, the Artemis cult,
Yeah.
in which women had superior knowledge to men. Women were not following the tradition of submitting to their husbands. And instead, I think they were domineering their husbands. And Paul's saying, no, just because mutual submission has come, it doesn't mean the wives don't have to keep submitting. So, because that's just part of mutual submission. So I often say, I'm not against wifely submission. I just want to get husbands to do it as well, because I think that's the beauty of the partnership. So then when it comes to head, he doesn't tell the husband, as we said, he doesn't tell the husband to be the head. He just recognizes that husbands are the head. And there's a lot of debate as to what this metaphor of head and body means. That doesn't mean that the head rules the body. It's possible, Does it mean that the head is the source of life for the body? That is also possible. Both meanings were there at Paul's time. So my question that I bring to Ephesians is, how does Paul use it? What is he trying to say through it? And he says to the husbands, husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself for her. So what does it mean for the husband to be the head? They should sacrificially love their wives. So that's what Christ-like headship means in Ephesians 5, sacrificial love for from the husband. So I'm not against saying that husbands should exercise Christ-like headship in the home, as long as we define it the way Ephesians 5 defines it, sacrificial love. So does that mean that the husbands submit and the wives love, and therefore the wives shouldn't love and the husband shouldn't submit? No, I don't think so. I think, of course, wives should love their husbands. And so it's not gender exclusive. It's just gender specific, because husbands, they would not have thought of loving their wives in the Greco-Roman culture. No. And a lot of other cultures today. Loving the wife is not necessary. And Paul is saying, it is the one thing I want to tell you to do. If I only get one thing to tell you, it is love your wife sacrificially. So that's what heads do. That's what the husband does. And what the wife does, she continues to submit to her husband. Nothing wrong with that. I think sacrificial love is that kind of submission that Paul is calling the husbands to do. So I think it's mutual submission. Wives, they already know what that looks like in the culture. Husbands, you don't have a clue what that looks like. You need to learn. So what he says to the husbands is the radical part. And we tend to dismiss that radical nature of it by saying, oh, no, he's telling husbands to continue to be the authority, which he doesn't do at all. He tells them to love sacrificially. Yeah. So I don't have any problem with Ephesians 5. I'm happy to talk about Ephesians 5, but I just don't want to leave out the one statement about authority that's clear, and that's 1 Corinthians 7, where neither spouse exercises authority, even over their own bodies, but they yield it. If you come into marriage, you're yielding to the other person mutually, not just one to the other.
Yeah. And it's interesting that, and thank you for connecting it to that part with First Corinthians 7. It's really interesting that Ephesians 5:22 is just copy and just thrown at people, or just elevated with and stripped off anything preceding it, to the extent that people are not even aware that Ephesians 5:21 talks about a mutual submission. There was a discussion again with someone who do the same Ephesians 5:22, and then I said, no, it says that we should. It first says mutual submission, and this person is like, no, it says no way. And I just said 21, and they just went quiet. It's like, oh my God, people really do not see this, right? So talking about the different positions or school of thoughts out there. So when I did my course in the spirit, we are one, with some other place, we had a problem. I had to leave, so I don't like to mention it. But the stance was that, or the background that we discussed was that in those days, there was this attainments, the issue of women being highly, high in status. They were intellectual, they were informed by the goddess attainments, and they even believed that with attainments could protect you to give birth, help you in childbearing. So that was when I think Peter said, no, you are not saved with attainments helping you as a woman to give birth. but women will give birth in childbearing through God, and it
Hmm.
doesn't come from demons.
Yeah,
So that is another.
that is Paul in
Yeah, that
First
is
Timothy
Paul.
2. Yeah,
Good.
that's so. I think First Timothy 2 is very much about the Artemis cult,
Yeah.
and in the Artemis cult also, women came first, men come second. Women have superior knowledge; they are not deceived. Men are deceived, and so everything he says there fits perfectly with the Artemis cult. Where women were domineering. They usurped the male authority of the day. Paul
Yeah.
says, I don't want women teaching in a domineering way because the woman came second. I think it's a humbling statement to the proud Artemis women of Ephesus. And the woman was deceived. And they're saying, no, 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 women aren't deceived, men are deceived. And Paul's saying, no, women are deceived too.
Yeah.
And then, yes, he says women can be saved, delivered through childbearing if they continue in, and then it's faithful, godly living. So trust God, don't trust Artemis.
No, don't trust Artimans. But yet, complementarians and others who do not know that background say, women are supposed to be such. Even Paul said that if you gave birth, and this is justification in other quarters for women who do not want to give, they don't want to be mothers, and that is the
Mhm.
argument that is thrown that Paul say you only be saved through childbirth. I'm like, no, you don't know the
Oh,
context.
no,
There is an
no.
issue that is going on behind the scene where they believe that there is this Artemis God who gives them children, and that's what Paul is
Mhm.
addressing. So always consider the letter as one-sided. You don't know what was sent to Paul and that he was responding to. But let me
Oh.
come quick. Let me come back quick to Ephesians 5. So,
Mhm.
this other school of thought that I learned from was that there was a law called Sana Magna or something,
Mhm.
where 50 years before I think Paul went there, Julius Caesar had it, and then later they annulled it, but it was to address the situation where, because women were being dominated, it was so patriarchal, and then this law was put into place where her father, her natural family could come and get her out of her marital home
Uh,
if it was learned that she was being abused or mistreated.
mm,
So women became more loyal to the natural family than
mhm.
to their family, to their marital family.
Mhm.
So Paul was addressing this and say, when you become Christian, women submit, that we interpret as submit in a contemporary submit was actually the English translate as that is actually aputazo, is
Mhm.
actually
Mhm.
identify, not
Mhm.
as submit as come under, but identify with your marital family, with your husband, wife, and
Mhm.
you husband, you can law it over your wife. You cannot be like, the society where in the Roman culture the men dominate, they are the head. No, you got
Mhm.
to learn to love and not treat a woman like a slave, because at that time women were like on the same level with servants or slaves. So
Mhm.
love express love, and then she uh, identify with your husband. That's what is interpreted as submit, as come
Mhm.
underneath. So I just wanted to share that other perspective.
Yes, and I'm not sure that I would go too far with that because slaves are also to submit to their masters, and so I think it can carry the idea of literally maybe ordering oneself under, but it's a voluntary act. So it's the husbands are never told to make sure their wives submit, which I think
No,
is terribly important because a lot of husbands feel like they need to subjugate their wives. And no, 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 no. It's not there. A wife is responsible before God for her own behavior, not responsible to her husband for her behavior, but to God for her behavior. And yes, women were treated along with the household property of children and slaves and women. And if a husband wanted a marital or if wanted sexual intimacy, he would seek it outside the home with the prostitutes and the courtiers in the Roman society. And I think that's why Paul is saying, no, love your wives. And back again in 1 Corinthians 7, the husband should be faithful to his wife just as much as the wife should be faithful to her husband. It's so powerful. Even in, if I can elaborate a little bit more in 1 Corinthians 7, even when it comes to divorce, same thing applies to husbands that applies to wives. Even when it comes to having a spiritual influence in the family, which a lot of complementarians will argue the man is the one who is the spiritual leader. But Paul's saying, no, a wife could lead her husband to Christ, or a husband could lead an unbelieving wife to Christ. A wife could be a sanctifying influence on her husband, and a husband can be a sanctifying influence on the wife. And with regard to being married and being saved through childbearing, Paul encourages women to stay single so they can have undivided devotion to God, and they won't be distracted by these worldly cares of marriage and how to please their husband. So, but he also says that of men. So men should, in Paul's opinion, men, it's better if they stayed single because they could serve God with undivided devotion. So whatever applies to the woman applies to the man, whatever applies to the man applies to the woman, 12 times over in 1 Corinthians 7. Why shouldn't we see it that way in Ephesians 5? And I think we should. Yeah, I think we should see it exactly like that. It's two different ways. It's how mutual submission looks with different individuals in the same time, but it's still mutual submission. Yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Dr. Pay. He said this is a great discussion. Thanks, Dr. Pay. Okay. I was going to loving the wife and submitting to the husband mean different things to different people, correct? Example, a woman cooking, cleaning, and yielding the body to the man 24/7 could be submission by one man and calling the husband Lord, as Sarah did to Abraham, can be seen as submission by other men. Please comment. Oh my God.
Where to go with that? I don't know. Of course, it is a possible expression of submission, but is it the kind of submission that the Bible calls for? And I think the answer is no. It doesn't call women to give their body 24/7, almost as a slave to a man. No place in the New Testament do we see that image. And yes, Sarah called Abraham Lord, but that was the common statement of respect, master. Even in modern Hebrew today, the same word. It's the word Baal, like the old Canaanite goddess or god, Baal. And they use it in modern Hebrew just to mean a term of respect. So a woman could say, my husband, Baali, it's my husband. So what does the term mean? What does Sarah mean when she calls Abraham Lord? She's not submitting to his authority. She's giving him respect, which we ought to give each other respect. Yes, absolutely.
Mutuality.
Mutuality, yes.
Yeah. That's the key word we need you to get out of this conversation, mutuality.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to interpret submission as come under or yield, then it should be done mutually. We
Right,
should
right.
all be able to yield each other to each other.
Yeah, Paul
Okay.
calls it esteeming others above yourself.
Yeah.
We should count others as we should esteem others above ourselves. That's mutuality, and that's hupotasso, is voluntarily submitting to other people out of reverence for Christ.
Yeah.
And so you are leading the discussion today, and I'm yielding to your leading in the discussion. That's something I'm happy to do just out of love for Christ. It has nothing to do with one of us having authority over another person. Yeah.
No. Yeah. And then the part about the headship, what is the word? Kapali? Do I say it right?
Yeah.
Was that because of the same mindset that women weren't created by God, they were made by inferior. They came from some inferior source, was what Paul was addressing when he said, no, So man is the kapali of women. So kapali can be interpreted as head, source,
Hmm.
beginning.
Hmm.
So he was addressing the fact that no, they came from the same place. They came from God, and women did not come
Hmm.
from somewhere foreign and somewhere superior.
Yes, I think the key to understanding Paul's use of kephale
Okay,
is
that's the word, perfectly.
kephale, yes, is in the context of Christ being the head of the church. And even he even says that in chapter 5. For the husband is the head of the wife, as Christ is the head of the church, his body, which he loved so that he gave himself for her. So, what does it mean for Christ to be the head of the church? Now, many of my complementarian friends would remind me that Christ is the Lord of the church. And I would say, well, of course he is. There's no doubt about that. But is that the way Paul is using the metaphor of head and body in this passage? Or even in the twin letters of Ephesians and Colossians? So that the head body metaphor, and especially just even the head metaphor, occurs 6 times in those. And when it means the head body as Christ being the head of the church, it never carries the idea of authority over. It's not that it
Yeah,
couldn't. It could. Paul could say that, but that's not what Paul says. So Christ is the source of the church. We grow from him. He's the
yeah,
provider of life for us. And then what does he say to the husband? Give yourself sacrificially like Christ gives himself for the church. There it is again. It's not his lordship, it's his sacrifice. One theologian even put it as Christ submits to the church, which maybe be a little too strong, but nevertheless, he is yielding himself for the sake of his body, the church. And that is sacrificial. That is what Christ does when he goes to the cross.
yeah.
He doesn't claim his kingship. He
No,
sacrifices himself for the sake of his body, the church. That's
yeah,
what husbands should do. That's the only thing this passage calls us to do as husbands.
yeah.
So if a husband wants to be the head of his wife, in a biblical sense, he should sacrifice himself for her.
I
That's it.
agree.
That's all we have
I
in there.
I agree. I agree. And with Chris, and if you want to consider Chris as the model for your being a good husband, as Chris is the groom of the church. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, Chris is someone who stood against lording over others. That was
Mm-hmm.
something I repeatedly, he demonstrated do not lord it over others.
Right.
He told them if someone wants to be a leader in your midst, he must be the servant. He demonstrated that by washing his disciples' feet.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, how much more will he did he not communicate that? He said, I don't no one take my life. I laid it down
Mm-hmm.
myself,
Mm-hmm.
you know.
Right.
So if you consider whatever Christ went through to be a sacrifice for you, how much louder can he have spoken that this is how I want you to do it out of love?
Yes. Yes. Absolutely. It's sacrificial love. The image of the husband washing the wife's feet might be good here,
Yeah.
because many husbands would say, "Oh no, that's humiliating." And
Yeah.
I would say, "No, it's humbling."
Their
And he
friends
said,
will
"What?"
make fun of them. They'll be
Yes.
like, "Oh yeah," in my
Yeah.
Liberian language, the
Yeah.
accent, they'll be like, "Oh, she's controlling you. You have a woman who controls you." I mean, just if
Yeah.
he chooses to demonstrate love that way, yeah,
Yes. Absolutely.
yeah. Okay. Anyway, so we are going to wrap up now
Mhm.
with I want you to please tell us about Galatians because I think that is
Yes.
where Paul kind of some say or really capture it where he talks about in Christ there is no gender, there is no race, there is no slave or free person.
Mhm. Mhm.
So that's another place that we can see that there's no hierarchy. Everything was neutralized there. Oh, before even Paul,
Yes.
didn't the Holy Spirit demonstrate that by coming upon them in the upper room and they
Yes.
didn't fall on different gender with okay, small fire tone on the female, and the male have a big fire tone because he's going to be the leader. Like, yeah.
No, no. Yeah, yeah. I mean, very good points there. Your question was with regard to
Galatian,
Galatians. Thank you.
yeah.
Yeah, the Galatians passage is often dismissed by complementarians because they argue it just means we're equal in being, because
Oh,
that means women get saved the same way men get saved, and that's all. But when they function differently. Men have to be leaders, women have to be followers. The point of the book
okay.
of Galatians is about Jew Gentile. And that would be like saying, okay, now Gentiles can get saved. Well, what about Ruth and Rahab? Gentiles could get saved before. The difference is Gentiles now can function equally with Jews in the body of Christ. And so the illustration he gives is Peter not being willing to eat with Gentiles, to sit at the table with them. That's function. Or of circumcision, or of keeping the holy days. All of that's function. So the point Paul's making is that Gentiles and Jews now can live it out the same way, that there's no distinction between Jew and Gentile. And if he's strong about this, he says, if you allow yourself to be circumcised, then Christ has nothing to do with you. In other words, if you submit to that old hierarchy of Jew above Gentile, then you're missing the point of the gospel. He says it to Peter. When Peter refuses to eat with those Gentiles, he says Peter is not acting consistently with the truth of the gospel. It's such powerful language. And then he simply says in 3:28, the same thing applies to slaves and the same thing applies to women. And so he can't mean just saved equally. The whole point of the book is, just as you have received Christ Jesus, so now you should live in Christ Jesus. The whole point of the book is how you live out your faith. And so I think he's saying we live out our faith in the new covenant, or we could say in the new creation. So we have the original creation, but now we have the new creation. And in the new creation, being male or female doesn't matter at all. The only thing that matters is that we all are a new creation in Christ. That's the only thing that matters. And so, yeah, I think Galatians is powerful. I think it has been dismissed much too easily by complementarians, not because of just one verse. They often accuse us of taking one verse out of context. No, my argument from Galatians has to do with the theme of the whole book. It is practical, applied in the church, men and women functioning together, just like Jew and Gentile can function together. So if women can't be senior pastors, then Gentiles can't be senior pastors.
As well.
Only Jewish people can.
I agree.
And of course, nobody would say that, you know. And so therefore, we need to stop. We need to stop being discriminatory against women and against people of lower socioeconomic status, which the Bible is very clear about as well. That's, I think, what Galatians is coming to. No slave and free, no male and female. We're all one in Christ. Yeah, beautiful, powerful statement of principle by Paul.
Thank you so much for ending with that. Thank you. That I don't know how else to have captured that. And I think like Jesus Christ already made a final statement by when the Holy Spirit came, by coming upon male, females, everyone, and not being selective based on gender.
Absolutely.
So, and then Paul just really nailed it home in Galatians. So I think I don't understand how you can go through all of those and still insist that but man is still the head. I mean, you can insist that, but to insist that that's how God wants it, and that's the will of that, that's the word of God, is what I it just cannot settle with me.
Yeah.
How
No.
can we go through from creation story all the way to what Christ demonstrated down to Paul and still tell us that patriarchy is God's divine will for us?
Right.
You
Right.
know, because I get the questions all the time. Okay, but what's about at home? Even though we're all God's children, but still I'm supposed to be the head. That's what God say. Or what happens if you and your husband, because I get those questions, what happens if me and my there is an impasse? The
Hmm.
man is supposed to take the final word because the man is the head. Like you're
No.
supposed to yield to
No.
each other.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say you work at it longer until you can come to a healthy compromise.
Yeah.
Or what I often do is if the question we're deciding in our marriage is something that my wife knows more about, she's an elementary school teacher. And so if it's what should we have our children go, where should we have our children go to school, or what kind of curriculum is good, I would look to her for input because she knows more about it. If it's about theology and university teaching, then I know more about it. So we just complement each other. But mostly, almost always, and we're 53 years later, almost always we are able eventually to work through it in a way that's just a healthy, respectful compromise. And I think we're better for it in the long run. Yeah. So it's
53
workable in
years.
marriage, absolutely workable.
Yeah. Well, happy 53 anniversary in
Thank
advance.
you.
I hope to remember. Is it next Sunday?
It is, yes, the 24th.
Okay, I hope to remember to message you or send you a happy anniversary
Thank you.
message. But other than that, yeah, thank you for coming on. Thank you for accepting the invite to come and talk to us.
Mm.
This is just amazing and generous of you to take your time and do this. I appreciate that so much. So thank you. If you want to close, give your closing comments or parting comment right now, that would be great.
Yes. Yeah. I think my closing comment, I would say, is to yield ourselves to one another, which is Paul also says this beautiful comment about submitting to one another. I think that is the leading factor. That is the commandment that we should follow the best.
Oh, that was quick. That was quick. That was quick. I ran to get. That was quick. I ran to get your book. So of the share.
Oh, okay.
So
Yes, yes, yes.
yeah, viewers, Dr. Ron Pierce jointly compiled this with other complementarians.
Hmm.
It's so rich. This is a
Mm.
great resource discovering biblical equality. You can get it off Amazon. You can get it off Amazon. This is it. Please. I encourage us to check this out. I encourage us this. This is not by him alone.
No,
So there
no,
are
not
great
at all.
minds in here. So this is a great resource. Just great minds in here, and you can learn from all of these people or some of them, or just get their perspective. You don't have to agree.
Hmm.
I heard
Hmm.
you say that that
Uh-huh.
we don't have to have consensus, but at
Right.
least we can have a respectful dialogue.
Amen. Yes,
So,
yes.
yeah, so I need you to check this out if you can, and then you can still hold your position if you want to
Sure.
continue to do so. Other than that, thank you so much, Dr. Pierce.
No, you're
This
very
is,
welcome.
yeah. All right. Take care.
Okay. Thank you
Okay.
so much, Priscilla. Bye bye.
All right. Take care. Bye bye. All right, folks. So we come to the end of today, noonday. We hope and we continue to work towards a new day. We pray for shifting mindset.
Mm.
We hope for reform in our social order as it was meant to be for us, some of us who hold the Christian worldview and believe that God made all of us in in God's image equally. I hope that we'll get to the place, we'll get a new day and get to the point where we will see each other as equal human beings, and this will influence the policies we make about women and girls in our society, and this will influence our attitude towards women and girls. This will, influence our culture, our practices. May God give us a new day. Thank you, thank you, thank you for staying with us this Sunday. I'll talk to you next Sunday. Okay, bye.
Lord, you said in your word, I should forget, the former things. You said, behold, you are about to do a new thing. You said you will do something new in my life. All the eyes of them that see it will marvel. But my enemies are shame, Lord. Please give me a new day. Give me a new day. Give me a new day. I don't want yesterday. All I want is a new day. Yesterday broke my heart. Yesterday brought me peace and frustration. I don't want yesterday. All that I want is a new day.